Hello, Winward, and welcome to the Pencils Down podcast. In service of Winward's mission to remediate our students' language-based learning disabilities, we take every instructional moment seriously, and we work to be intentional in everything we do. This podcast is an opportunity for Jamie Williamson, our head of school, to have an informal series of unscripted conversations with different members of our community about who they are, what they care about, and what the Windward School means to them. So, we're putting our pencils down, we're closing up our computers, and we're looking forward to sharing another conversation.
First off, I just want to say I am so excited to be here and sort of presenting the first episode of Pencils Down. A few months ago, I had a bit of a wild hair idea of how can we really share some of the great stories from some of the incredible people we have in our community who do wonderful work in service of our mission. And we got some feedback from folks in the community as we over the last few years that we've grown a little bit and we have a lot of new faces. And sometimes when you're in a space not knowing what's happening in the other space, because we do have 3 campuses, we're really trying to connect as often and as well as we can. So I had this idea that maybe we could actually start to interview some key folks in our community, share a little bit about the work they're doing, bring their full authentic self to the table here, and have a conversation. So this is really designed to be not a presentation. There's no slides with this. There's no massive structure, but really wanted it to be kind of a low-key conversation where we get a chance to share a little bit about who you are, the work you're doing, how you kind of line up with our mission, and talk about some of the priorities within your kind of work or scope of work within your department and field. So very, very, very excited. So our first episode here, I have what I think is really a wonderful first guest here. So Lisa Murray is our Associate Head of Academic Programs. Lisa started here last year. It was a new role for us. We've been doing some incredible work here as a school, but one of the things we really wanted to do was try to knit the whole of our academic program under one umbrella, so that way we could really start to think about, how do we create a model of continuous improvement, always looking at the research to help guide the work forward. And I'm just so excited that Lisa decided to join us, and I'm really excited for our community to get a chance to get to know you a little bit deeper as we go through this process. So first and foremost, Lisa, again, a big thank you for being here. I'm so glad to have you. I want to start with a little bit of gratitude. So I've had the pleasure, I would argue, of knowing you for almost 9 years I've known you, maybe going on 10.
Yeah.
And I just have to say, in that time, there's a few things that have always struck me about you. One is you are one of the kindest human beings I've had a chance to get to know. I think you show up in a space where you put kids first. I think it's all about you showing up in a space where you get to be in service of kids in a mission. And I think you show up with just a really tremendous level of curiosity that I always sort of I find a lot of kinship with, but also just a lot of appreciation and all. So thank you for that. Really, really so glad you're here and part of our community in that way. So as we get started here, I'd love, because I think the idea of looking at our leadership story and journey, almost the origin story. I don't know if you're a Marvel fan or a comic fan, but like these great heroes, right, have these origin stories. There's something happens and they're sort of the spot here where they're sort of finding their path in the world. So as you think about your journey in leadership, what brought you into leadership and to kind of help make you the professional that you are today?
Thank you for the question. And first, I want to say thank you right back, because I'm so honored to not only be a part of this conversation, I'm really looking forward to it, but I'm the first one.
Yeah,
That's so exciting.
It is.
And a little bit scary at the same time, but that's good.
Two things can be true, right?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So I came to Winward, like you said, last year from a school very similar to Winward in Atlanta, where I'd been 10 years. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of the direct line to leadership, but I want to back up a lot farther, because I really had no intention of being in the field of education.
Yeah.
When I first started my career, I worked in government, and I come from a pretty privileged background. My mom was a classroom teacher, of all things, and my dad was a medical doctor. He's retired now. Both are retired now. And in fact, my mom retired very early to raise my older sister and I. Okay. And as we got older, my sister got really interested in the medical field, and I had no interest in medicine and no interest in education. Uh-huh. I wanted to strike my own path. Maybe that was partly being the youngest child. I don't know. And so I went into government work, and it's interesting to kind of connect the dots now, because I look back and I think I was always thinking like, wait, maybe I do want to teach, right? Yeah. And so I worked for the U.S. Congress for a while doing policy analysis, not in education, even though my master's work was in school reform. Yeah. And did a policy paper that was sort of the culminating paper of my master's work on a specific school reform that came out of the Yale Child Study Center, of all places. Huh. And now we do so much work with that center. So it's kind of interesting to think back on that. Anyway, long story short, my husband and I got married and had 4 children. And in between that, I had the great privilege to be able to stay home with our kids for a while. Yeah. And really kind of started itching to go back to work at that point, and finally stopped resisting the I don't want to do what my mom did kind of thing, and was like, I love being at home with the kids and I love being their teacher at home. And so I went back and did some classes and some master's work. One thing led to another, a move from Chicago to Atlanta, and kind of put the school work on hold a little bit. But then as the kids got older, I decided to work in preschool. So I taught preschool part-time for a few years while I was still staying home with my young kids. And then our youngest son, Luke, was in preschool and then kindergarten and then first grade, and just didn't seem quite the same reading progress as the other kids had been. And we didn't really know what was up with that. We asked a lot of questions of the teachers. Yeah. He was in a public school in suburban Atlanta at the time. And long story short, we got him some neuropsych testing, and he was diagnosed with ADHD and dyslexia. And we were fortunate enough in Atlanta to have a school nearby, very much like Windward, that he was able to attend. And so he was there at the Skank School for 3rd and 4th grade. And when he was in 4th grade, I got really interested in their Orton Gillingham teacher training program. And anyone could take it. They had, not just for their internal faculty. Yeah. And so I, as a parent, took the course. And it was like this light bulb moment for me. I had done some education work before, but I never really taught kids how to read. Yeah. And I always was sort of left with, and that was sort of the whole language era when I was doing those courses. And so it was always like, but what do you do on Monday morning when you're trying to teach a kid to read? And so that really was kind of the rest is history kind of thing. I started to tutor, privately tutor from my home. Yeah. But I was really missing a professional community. Yeah. And so I got a job at the Swift School in Atlanta, and I taught 4th grade there, and then middle school at Swift, and spent a couple years there, and that finally led me back to Skank as a 4th grade teacher. And a few years teaching 4th grade, and we had an interim head of school that year in between a very long time head and then what would eventually become our new head. And he kind of became a mentor to me. We just really connected. And I think he saw some leadership qualities in me that I didn't even see. Yeah. And an leadership opportunity opened up at the school. They were restructuring, and it was an assistant principal of the school. And he called me into his office one day, and he was like, I just need your advice. Who do you think we should hire for this role? And he's like, I'm putting you on the spot, so you can take some time to think about it. And I was like, thanks, I'll think about it, and I got back to him, and I was like super flattered that he wasn't even asking me. Yeah. 4th grade teacher, I'm not sure, except that we had kind of connected. And I came back to him and I said, I think it would be really healthy for the school. We have a lot of really committed people who've been here for a really long time. And it would be a good opportunity for a mix of, maybe some outside ideas. I think you should post it externally. Yeah. He was like, I thought about that. And we're kind of not in the right timeline for that. We're in a little bit of a time crunch. So I think we're just going to keep it internal. And I'd really encourage you to apply. Yeah. So it was a really kind of interesting way for him to share with me the confidence that he had in me and kind of some things he saw in me for leadership that I didn't see. And so, I ended up applying and got the job and really enjoyed it. I think right off the bat, what I liked in the shift from classroom teaching to that more administrative leadership role was to be able to see K through 6 kids.
Yeah.
Oh, it was like magical. I didn't even expect kind of the impact it would have on me as a leader. That year, some of the kids that I'd been in my 4th grade class were in 6th grade, and their 6th grade teachers would be, we'd have meetings and be like, oh, they're just humming along. They're like, they're going to this, they're outplacing to this school, that school. And I'm like, full stop. You do know in 4th grade, we were working on vowel sounds.
Yeah.
And that was just like, oh my God, this is so cool to be able to see that trajectory of those kids.
And then the full scope of a program, right?
Yeah.
And the impact that program has from start to finish, which I think is, I do think it's one of the benefits of setting in a space where you get to zoom out a little bit.
Yeah.
And kind of look at the whole of a conversation. That's great. And I want to applaud your mentor there. Because I do think in a leadership sort of space, I think one of the things that I find to be so important in that work is working to make room for others, right? The idea of, and helping cultivate and fan some fires in a really positive way. When you see a little kernel of a glimmer of spark of hope, how do you take a moment and kind of turn that spark into an ember and that ember into a flame, and helping move someone in a career. And giving them some permission to lead in so many ways, because I think it's hard for us to give ourselves permission at times, speaking fully for myself. But I think it's really important to allow, as leaders, for us to give that space to others.
No, I think that's a really important point, because now I think in my leadership, I think back to that, and I'm like, hoping that I'm seeing that and looking for that in other people that I'm working with as well. Yeah.
I would imagine that you do. There are so many places that you could show up as, an incredibly well-trained, educated teacher and educator. You could lead in lots of different spots. And one of the things I like to ask when I'm interviewing folks, on one early conversations is, why Winward? There's tons of great schools in this country. There's lots of great places that you could have an impact. Why be here? Why show up here to do this work with us?
Honestly, it was the academic program. I know that sounds like I'm sort of pandering, but honestly and truly it was. And so at Skank, I was part of this Association of LD Schools. It's just recently been formed. It was before that sort of a loose affiliation, which is where I met you. And really that organization has just opened up the world to me, because I was like, I didn't even know all these schools existed, right? I thought we were just so lucky to have this one school in Atlanta for our son, and then for me to have leadership opportunity, teaching opportunities and leadership opportunities. And I heard about Winward, I guess, early on in that affiliation. But then through our strategic plan at Skank, we were really, a couple of our academic strategic initiatives, one of them was writing. And we really took a deep look at our writing program and asked questions about how we could do better. And part of it was to look outside at other schools like us, serving students like ours. And of course, Winward rose to the top, and it gave us, as a kind of writing subcommittee, opportunity to kind of dive in and talk to folks from Winward. We visited Winward. And so I just sort of think of the writing, actually at the time, and still I think, wow, if that writing program had been available to my son, that would have been so helpful. As we know, the writing piece is the piece that takes the longest to remediate. It really does. And even our students who, when they leave Winward, they're still working on that. And they're using a lot of the tools and resources from the writing program. And so that really is one of the big things that drew me to Winward, but also, my knowing you through that association, and knowing the kind of leader you are was really attractive to me too. And then in the interview process, just meeting everyone. I mean, I must have met, I don't know how many people each day.
I'd say the ringer was a great way to kind of describe that process. We put you through some paces.
Yeah, definitely. I was exhausted after all of it, but really all of the people I met in that interview process, so committed and so bright and smart and just as passionate about our kids that I knew that I wanted that opportunity. Yeah.
And I think that the word you use there, I want to kind of take a moment to kind of segue into a kind of a values conversation. In my first year coming into this as a leader, one of the things I've always tried to do is to think about the work in terms of core values. Because those, I do think we all have a set of values that we operate from, whether they're seen or unseen, named or unnamed. And I've always found it really helpful from a school community standpoint to spend some time kind of defining them and discovering them. And I also believe that as the head of school, I don't have the right to just dictate what our values are, because we've been doing great work for a long time. And I think it's really important to kind of honor that sort of the history there and to capture what's actually happening. And then so that way, when we're from a cultural standpoint, we can sort of, as we're looking at new hires or new initiatives, we can pull things through that lens. And there was a few of our values as an organization that I could see from my place in Columbus coming up, right? And that one of commitment is actually the one that had you forced me to guess what some of the outcome of this would have been prior to doing the core value work, I would have told you commitment. I can't imagine commitment wouldn't be on this list because of the dedication to the research and the evidence-based sort of PCR and bringing that research into practice has been something we have done so well for so long, and I think it's just part of our DNA. But the other thing that I wanted one that came through this was this idea of growth, that we have this incredible professional development program here where teachers and everyone in our community, faculty, staff alike, spend time engaging in professional growth in a very intentional and prescriptive way. And I think that idea of being open to your strengths, recognizing where you are as a human being, and working as an organization to kind of get a little bit better today than you were yesterday, and thinking about where we head. And those are all wonderful things for a school to be doing. And then the other value that came out, so we've got commitment, we've got growth, was this idea of community. And I think this was such a really wonderful example here, is that our folks want to be here. They want to be together. They want to be in service of kids, in service of in support of our mission. And then the last one, as we were launching Windward Institute and seeing ourselves as really a force. We've always been a force for good in the greater New York area from a teacher training standpoint. So I think when you run an LD school or you're involved in leadership in a school like ours, I do think that you not only sort of want to serve every child in your building and do that exceptionally well, but I think we also find ourselves with feeling a bit of responsibility to make sure that we actually help as many kids in the world as we possibly can. And so that's where this idea of impact came through, which is really one of the kernels of the work that drew me up here in a big way, and not in addition to the incredible academic program, was the idea of us working to kind of formalize and push that out into the community a little bit more through the Winward Institute. So, and I think as a leader and as a learner, like I have spent some time. I read Brene Brown's Dare to Lead several years ago, and I actually brought that book when I came. That was our first summer read when I showed up. I think we had a lot of discussions, but one of the things that she talks about in the book is the idea of like pushing it to 2. Right, so thinking about your core values, and can you really think about your top 2? Because I think we can all come up with like 19, right? Yeah. In a worst case, maybe 5. Sometimes people want to do a lot, but I think when you really do the old proverbial scratch and sniff, and really think about what your 2 biggest guiding principles are from a leadership standpoint or from a human standpoint. I think when you have clarity about that, I think a lot of your life sometimes makes sense. I think a lot of your action makes sense to yourself and others. And this idea of working in a very congruent space just always feels really good. So when I think about Winward's values of kind of growth, community, commitment, and impact, and then I think about my own personal sort of set of core values, which for me, I had a really good friend and colleague when I was in my last school, who ran their outreach program, Stephanie Royal, who I loved and adored and just had a lot of respect for. She could be a critical friend to me. So I was talking to her about my core values at the time, and I was like, growth. She's like 100%. Like, you are like, that's your ethos. Like, I try to show up, and I try to recognize that I'd like to think I have some strengths in the world. But I also see myself as like, I'm here to learn. I'm a learner. I'm always seeking a little bit of additional knowledge, trying to understand the world. I'm trying to be curious and try to figure out how I fit into all that and how I can get a little bit better today than I was previously. And then but the last one, she and I went round and round because I had a really hard time landing on my number 2. I had a lot of stand-ins, and I would get really excited, and I'd go back to Stephanie, and she would be like, no. That's a good one. I think it's important to you, but it's actually not. It's not you. It's not your number 2. So when the dust settled and I had really reflected and gotten thwarted by her perception of my work on some of these spaces, it came back to the idea that, like, I really love having impact. Growing up where I grew up and thinking about the world in a way that, I've always tried to leave it on a bigger scale, like to leave it a little bit better than I found it. And this idea for me of the responsibility of pushing our work into the community and thinking about how do we help more kids, just it always felt right to me. Like, I've been given a sandbox I got to play in when I was a kid, and I've been constantly remodeling and pushing that sandbox out and trying to have a bigger impact. And this idea of seeing the connection between growth and impact for me have just been a really interesting journey that I think has really culminated in my work and really allowed me to become the leader that I am today. But as you think about your core values, like, have you spent any time sort of thinking and reflecting on, like, what are your top 2 values?
I have.
Yeah?
Yeah.
I'd
Maybe
love
you
to
can be my Stephanie Royal.
Yeah,
here.
I'd be happy to play that.
Well, and in fact, going back to the previous question, looking at Winward's core values, I was like, I'm aligned. Like, that was one of the draws. And, I'm not making this up. You're going to think I'm like,
no,
I don't know what, but growth and impact.
I see that. I think it's also one of the things I just enjoy about you is that I do see that alignment.
Yeah. So I can kind of trace both of those back, to kind of tapping back into my leadership story.
Yeah.
I think impact has been a part of me for a really long time. I'm not sure exactly where it came from, but I think back before I was in the field of education and I was working in the public sector.
Yeah.
It was sort of a corporate job too. I'm from Chicago, and it was in Chicago, but we had an arrangement with Chicago Public Schools where we would tutor once a month, people from our office. And that was super meaningful work for me.
Yeah.
And even going back farther in grad school, I volunteer tutored in Trenton, New Jersey. And I don't know, I sort of traced back the line, and I'm like, there's something about like having an impact on kids that really makes me tick.
Yeah. And
even as I was sort of doing other things at the same time, it took me a while to realize that was what kind of was a real core value for me. And then when we started our own family, and just being able to stay home with my kids and the impact I could have on their lives, because that I could do that. And then of course when our youngest was diagnosed dyslexic, it kind of elevated that a little bit. I was working some at that time, but I feel really strongly that kids who are dyslexic or have other language-based learning disabilities, if they have at least one adult champion in their lives, it can make all the difference in the world. It could be a parent, it could be a teacher, it could be an uncle, a relative, a friend. And I think that's where it's all, that impact piece all kind of came to head. Like, this is really important to me. And then the growth piece is just like, I'm always curious, maybe to a fault sometimes. It's possible.
I've been accused of that.
And I think that can be challenging sometimes in this really fast-paced world we live in. Like, don't grab every shiny ring, but I think I'm able to at least modulate that a little bit, that I can be interested in different things and say, okay, we got to settle on one and talk through it. And
I just, in thinking back to, I think both of those values, one, and I think I do find they work really well together, right? So the idea of being on this personal journey and working to kind of think about all the things you do well and what are the areas that you might sort of like improve upon. And then when I think about the impact piece, I love the idea of being in service to something bigger than me.
Yes.
Right? Like it really anchors me.
Oh, me too.
And makes me feel small in some ways, but also makes me feel like really connected in others.
It's very human.
It really is.
Yeah.
It really is. It's also why, like, you know, in the work that, as you alluded to earlier, like the Association of Learning Disabilities Schools, this has been a concept that's been floating for years in the ether of our schools, and they've been all fairly disconnected, and pretty, you know, and pretty insular in that work.
Yeah.
And I love this little bit of a renaissance space that we're in right now. This period where schools are coming to the table like ours, other schools like ours, working to kind of think about the greater good, working to think about the collective impact, working to think about what we can learn and sort of gain from each other, and not in a competitive way, but in a supportive way, which I just find to be just beautiful. So
Yeah, I totally agree.
it's been a really fun project to be
Yeah.
part of. You know, in your work coming in, this is a new role for Winward. So this is also a really big role. Yes. So as you know, as we talk about frequently in our weeklies and other sort of times during the week, there's a lot happening here. We have this incredible language arts program. We have this amazing study skills program. We have a wonderful science and social studies. We do some good math work. You know, we really allow kids to feel seen, heard, and we also want to make sure we're leveraging research in the process of this. So in any kind of wing of that, or any kind of like little chunk of that work, like you could probably have 30, 40 things that you're listing out that you're working on or trying to kind of help your teams, the teams that you are supporting, our coordinators, our academic team, our campus heads, our parents at times, supporting folks with. But like, let's kind of maybe take a little bit of a zoom out here, and as we're kind of tapping into the earlier part of the conversation, kind of seeing the whole, the gestalt, if you will. So what are like maybe a couple of things right now that you're really, over the course of the next year, that are really big priorities for you in the work, just so folks can kind of get a sense of how you're sort of really thinking about pointing and sort of focusing your time.
Yeah. No, I'm so glad you highlighted the commitment to research for Winward, because that really helps me think about what my two biggest priorities are. And one of them is, and I think I get really excited about this whenever I talk to faculty about it, is that Winward's history in their academic program is a really good foundation in building knowledge. And I've been really interested lately in this idea of building background knowledge, and reading comprehension research of late really speaks to really comprehension is knowledge. It's been a long road. I don't know if you had this in elementary school, but we'd read a passage and answer a few multiple choice questions, and then we'd go to the next passage and be a totally different topic. And that probably isn't building kids' knowledge, but Winward actually has a pretty good foundation with that, like with social studies very much interconnected with language arts, and I think we could do more with science in that respect. And I really want to build on that even more, because it very much matches this more recent reading comprehension research. And I think some of the curriculum mapping work we've been doing in this Understanding by Design framework really speaks to that, thinking about where do we want our kids to wind up first and work backwards from that. And I think that really helps to build a cohesive curriculum that our kids feel, right? They make those connections, and we're really working to build their knowledge. So that's one big area that's a big priority for me. Another one is math. And like you said, we do some good work in our math department. I think we can build on that. We've had the WI has brought in some math researchers to do some webinars. Some of my
favorite math researchers.
Yes, right. Paul Riccomini, and I'm kind of looking at some others to bring them in. And this is a real area of interest for me, because the year that I taught middle school, I had a group of middle school boys who just did not understand long division. And first day, they asked me, Ms. Murray, when are we going to learn long division? I was like, as I learned how much they knew, they wanted a calculator to just punch it in, because it was really hard for them, right? So I thought, gosh, they really need to understand this conceptually before they can ever even do the arithmetic of it. And that kind of lit my fire with like, okay, so what do our kids with dyslexia and language-based learning disabilities, how does that show up in math class? And so it's been sort of a quest of mine for like probably the last 12 years to kind of dig into that research. And I think there's so much out there, and it's really kind of exploded even in the last few years. And there's some math researchers out there that I'd love to get into the mix. And so that's a priority for me too. And that's kind of based on some of the, the feedback we've heard from our alums too, that like, we could benefit from that in our math program.
I will maybe tap back to the comprehension conversation, because I do think the dialogue and the research around comprehension has shifted in the last several years.
Yes.
And it's been a fascinating shift to understanding, the importance of background knowledge, understanding the importance of really deep and intentional language construction in a classroom. And when I go into our classrooms, I'm blown away by how well our teachers will scaffold and kind of create some of that work, and the intentionality behind the background knowledge. Like I was in I think it was a 7th grade classroom, and they were reading a story about the Great Depression and how that was sort of playing out in the Florida Keys. So we were talking about, do we know where the Florida Keys are? What's the Great Depression? It has to do with this can of beans? It was like this really, really deep sort of background dive on what the kids needed to know to be able to understand and comprehend the story. Right.
That's exactly what I'm talking about.
And then watching the intentionality around vocabulary sort of development and how that links up from 1st grade on up through 8th grade. And you see these little threads that get pulled together. Which is why, when we think about the strength of our program and the consistency and the fidelity of program, just really I have every time I go into a class, I leave with just such a level of excitement as to what we're doing, but also recognizing that research, if we're truly going to be a research-based and kind of evidence-based sort of program, right, where we're going to draw our inspiration from translating science to practice, I think it calls upon us in every way to always be thinking and looking and asking the question and coming up with a little bit of curiosity in that space, and working to kind of iterate. How do we here's where we are today, and how do we grow a little bit? And I'm really excited to see where that work goes in comprehension, and that tie to bring that great sort of work to build on that even more, but also too to think about how we tie in our science work a little bit, because science is such a vocabulary intensive space, and how that sort of plays into study skills. I think there's some really exciting sort of pieces there that are going to come together in such an even more incredible way for us.
Very much on the same page.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then when I think about math, some of the stuff that we've worked, because Paul Riccomini, for those of you who don't know Paul, Paul's actually on our advisory board, teaches at Penn State. He's been a really interesting kind of intersection. So he's a parent of a child with a language-based learning disability. Yeah. He was a high school math teacher, got his PhD. He does research. He had some special education experience, some regular education experience. So he really, I think, brings a bit of a trifecta in terms of who
I love those researchers that have that classroom experience.
I do too. It makes me really happy when they do. Like a Devin Kearns, right? Yeah. Who's such a good practitioner, but also such an amazing researcher as well. But Paul will challenge us to think about retention in a way that I was oh my gosh, do they not know the skill that they just worked on, or was it they just didn't retain the information, which are actually you approach from a very different perspective if you're trying to reteach. So one's about activating some forgotten stuff. The other's about continuing developing understanding, and how you stack, your classroom process to kind of, to really kind of hit that need. So I think there's just lots of great space where we'll have a chance over time to continue to build and really deepen our understanding of the research in this particular space. Because math and reading, as you well know, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but it's almost like an 8-to-1 or a 10-to-1. For every article that comes out in math, you have 8 to 10 coming out in reading.
Yes.
So there's not a lot of folks doing this incredible work in math. And those who are, I think, are deeply passionate about it. And we want to make sure that we're just pulling some of those voices to help us think about how we serve our kids and families to a little bit deeper and a little bit better level. But recognizing that we are still doing some incredible work every Monday, every Tuesday,
Right.
every Thursday, right?
Right.
And every other space in between that. But I really appreciate you being here. Thank you for going first.
Someone had to.
Somebody had to, and what a great sort of positive way to get started here. So
It's been really fun, Jamie.
yeah,
Thank you so much.
for sharing some time, and for those of you who are joining us today, I really appreciate you being part of our community and for tapping in and listening a little bit. And also just want to give a big shout out here because we have a couple other podcasts that I really want to make sure that we don't miss an opportunity to plug. If you haven't listened to the Read podcast with Dr. Danielle Gomez, like when you finish this, go pick that one up, right? Just go straight into it, right? Just go from like practitioner, here's what's happening within Winward, to understanding what are some folks out in the community and the research side of this doing. She does an amazing job at that. And also, like on occasion, I get to elbow my way in, and she and I have a wonderful conversation with leaders in the reading space called Lead on Read.
And I think the vibe right now in the world is that we're on a really good pathway here, to making some really significant impact. So,
and that has been just it fills me we do it like 4 times a year, like every quarter, and those episodes, like I absolutely love being part of those conversations because we've had some beautiful leadership and some inspiring conversations about some folks out in the community who are doing wonderful work across our country. We're trying to lift up some of those stories, just as we're trying to lift up some stories internally here into some of the great work that's happening. So thank you for your time, and I look forward to seeing you all soon. Thanks.
Thank you.